Good evening, my little pips. How are you today? Did you have a nice day? It's been a while since our last reading session. I hope you've been taking care of yourself, ate properly, and got enough sleep. I'm sorry for the lack of reading videos recently. Truth to be told, I was super unhappy with the sound quality of them. So I got a new microphone. The sound quality should be way better now, which also means that hopefully you can enjoy these videos even more. Without further ado though, let's get comfy and have a good time, okay? The Viking and Germanic words. The mythology of the Viking and Germanic words had its roots in a pagan tradition that survived in the northern lands all into the Christian era. In recent times, archaeological discoveries of bog bodies and ship burials have vividly brought home the reality of the old beliefs. Most of what we know today about northern mythology comes from the Viking lands, largely thanks to compilations like the Eddas that were put together in medieval times. These recorded the doings of a range of deities linked into groups, the Aesir and the Vanir, that were said at one time to have fought a war against one another. Some scholars have seen in the story of the conflict historical memories of the forced merging of two separate bodies of myth, in which the martial Aesir sky gods ultimately predominated over the fertility spirits of the Vanir. Both groups came eventually to live in harmony in the celestial realm of Asgard, located above the human world of Midgard, which in turn topped dark Niflheim, the abode of the dead. The greatest of the Aesir was Odin, a complex character renowned as much for his foresight as for his skill in battle. Legends told how he sacrificed an eye to win the gift of wisdom, and how he used the cunning for which he was famed to steal the meat of poetry. Odin's match when it came to fighting, the mighty Thor, was in comparison a straightforward character, celebrated more for his brawn than his brain. A typical story has him whining with Jormungand, the monstrous world serpent that straddled the earth on the ocean's floor. The Aesir's anti-hero was Loki, a trickster figure repeatedly involved in self-serving intrigues that risked bringing disaster on his fellow deities. In the tale of Balder, however, he played an altogether more sinister role as an active force of evil, scheming to bring about the death of this most loved of gods, and so setting in motion the train of events that would lead to the final catalysm of Ragnarok, the predestined end of the world in its current form. The chief of the Vanir was Frey, associated with agriculture and the changing seasons. The stories about him and his beautiful sister Freya have a different atmosphere to those surrounding the Aesir, being more concerned with love and sexual desire. One told of the passion Frey conceived for the giantess Gerd and their subsequent marriage. Another detailed how far Freya was prepared to go to obtain a matchless necklace from its makers. The giants played a prominent role in Norse myth, locked in rivalry with the gods through the lust for power as well as sexual desire. The antagonism between the two races was fated to have disastrous consequences, but ultimately they were destined to confront one another in the curse of Ragnarok. Other significant players in the stories were the dwarves, wonderful smiths, who provided the gods with their greatest treasures. Monsters also featured strongly, the worst of them the brood of Loki and the giantess Angboda, whose unnatural children included not just Jormungand, but also the terrible wolf Fenrir. No such coherent body of myth has survived from the Germanic world. Little is known of its gods and goddesses has come down mostly from outside sources, notably the Roman historian Tacitus. There are, however, a number of hero legends, the most famous of them gathered in the Nibelung cycle. dramatized by the 19th century German composer Richard Wagner in the Ring of the Nibelung operas. Many of the legends, like those of the quasi-historical warrior Ragnar Lodbrok, were also shared with the Viking peoples to the north. Old Norse sources even provided their own centenary ending to the Nibelung saga, featuring Gunnar and Hogni in place of the Germanic Gunther and Hagen. Again, a little apology for any name I pronounce wrongly. I do translate most words, but not names, in Google Translate to see how they are pronounced. But yeah, sometimes a word still slips away. So yeah, I hope it's not too bad and you can still understand what I'm reading. Anyways, I believe some of you were really looking forward to Norse mythology. It feels like most humans are either drawn to Norse mythology or Greek mythology. What do you think? I myself don't know that much about Norse mythology, besides the few big names that came up in different media most of the time, like Odin, Thor and Loki. I'm more of a Greece mythology enjoyer. Let's start with our first story, the mead of poetry. Odin wins the mead of poetry. The mead of poetry conferred the ability to compose poetry or pronounce words of wisdom on those who drank it. Odin had to call on all his powers of cunning and guile to take it from the guardian, giant Suttung, in order to give it to the gods. Disguised as a mortal and calling himself Bulwark, which meant evildoer, Odin took up lodgings with Suttung's brother, a giant called Baugi, who had owned 9 slaves, all of whom Odin had ruthlessly murdered. He offered to do their work in return for a drink of Suttung's mead of inspiration. Baugi accepted this arrangement. When he had completed his work, Bulwark demanded his reward, and so the two of them set off for Suttung's mountain home. When they arrived, Suttung flatly refused to take any part in Bulwark and Baugi's pact. So Bulwark ordered Baugi to bore a hole into the mountain, which he believed contained the mead. When a tunnel had been created, Bulwark transformed himself into a snake and slid into it. There he discovered Gunnlod, Suttung's daughter, who guarded the precious liquid. He lay with her for 3 nights, for which she granted him 3 tastes of the drink. He took full advantage, draining 3 whole vats of the mead. Odin then turned himself into an eagle and escaped to Asgard. Furious, Suttung also took the shape of an eagle and followed in pursuit. When the Aesir saw Odin approaching, they placed special containers in the courtyard, so that as he flew overhead, he could release the mead into them. Suttung, however, was so close behind his opponent that he caused Odin to spill a little of the mead outside the walls of Asgard. And ever since that time, any mortal who so wishes has been free to partake of it there. Odin is such a Schlawiner. I didn't know he was like that at all. You should definitely check out that spot though, where he dropped a little of the mead outside of Asgard. Do you know, by chance, where Asgard is located? Then again, it's probably quite disgusting, honestly. It's maybe like sunk into the earth and other mortals, other humans already drank from it and all their cooties are in there. So maybe not. Maybe we should just gain wisdom through the normal, boring way by just consuming as many media and opinions and books as we can. Back to Odin though. I don't know, the media I saw him in, he was always portrayed as this wise old king. I'm not sure actually. Then again, I didn't watch that much about him. But yeah, like ruthless maybe a little bit. Strict. But not like that he tricked people. This sounds more like a thing Loki would do now, how he is characterized. On to our next story. Thor loses his hammer. Thor's most precious possessing was his hammer Mjolnir, a weapon that could never miss its mark and always returned to the hand of its owner. He used it to protect the gods from their great enemies, the giants, and so when it was stolen, panic quickly spread through Asgard. When Thor found that his hammer was missing, he went straight to Loki, who soon discovered the culprit, Thrym, Lord of the Giants. Thrym told Loki that he would return the hammer only if he were given the goddess Freya as his bride. However, when Loki and Thor told Freya to prepare herself for marriage, she flew into a rage and would not hear of it. Heimdall came up with a solution to this dangerous situation. Let us dress Thor in bridal clothes and send him to Thrym in place of Freya. Thor protested, but Loki reminded him of Asgard's fate if he refused. So Thor was dressed in bridal finery, with Freya's prized gold necklace around his neck and the veil over his head. Loki went with him dressed as his handmaiden. Thrym was very pleased to see Freya and ordered a great feast to be prepared. Thor ate the whole ox, ate salmon and all the other delicacies washed down with 3 horns of meat. Thrym was aghast. Freya has eaten and drunk nothing for 8 whole nights. So eager was she to come to Giant Land, explained Loki. On hearing that, Thrym was so pleased he went to kiss Freya, but reared back in fright. Why are Freya's eyes so red and fierce? Gasped. Loki quickly replied. Freya has not slept for 8 nights, so eager was she to come to Giant Land. As gullible as the other giants, Thrym was satisfied and eager to proceed with the wedding. He ordered the hammer to be brought in to hallow the couple. As soon as it was laid on the bride's lap, Thor leaped up, grabbed Mjolnir and tore off his veil. Armed once again, he crushed all the giants in the hall, choosing Thrym as the first of his victims. A very smart person once said, "Weddings are like funerals with cake." I guess this was also true for this wedding. Jokes aside though, I love this move, how Loki and Thor work together to get the hammer back. It's just great. I want to read more Thor and Loki adventures now. I feel a little bit bad for the giants though. I just wanted to enjoy the wedding party. It had nothing to do with the hammer being stolen. Our next move is about Thor and his rivalry with a snake. Thor fights the word serpent. Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, so large it could wrap itself around the world, was Thor's most formidable adversary. The gods meeting with a giant gave him an opportunity to destroy it, which he greatly desired to do. Thor was traveling across Midgard, having adopted the appearance of a young boy. During this journey, he took lodgings at the home of a giant called Hymir, who was about to undertake a fishing expedition. Seeing this as an opportunity to confront the word serpent, Thor inquired if he could accompany him. The giant looked him up and down and replied dismissively that he would not be much use as he was so small. Thor, mindful that he needed the boat, had to restrain his temper. Ymir ordered his companion to find his own bait, so Thor tore off the head of the largest ox in Hymir's herd. The pair launched the boat and rowed fast, until Hymir said that they had reached his usual fishing ground. Thor insisted that they continue further, so they took up the oars again. When Hymir suggested that it would be dangerous to go any further because of Jormungand, Thor ignored him and rowed on. Finally, Thor chose a strong line with a huge hook on the end, to which he fastened the ox head before throwing it overboard. Deep under the sea, the Midgard serpent went for the bait and swallowed the hook. It pulled away so violently that Thor was flung dramatically against the side of the boat. Summoning up all his strength, he pushed his feet through the bottom of the boat and braced them against the seabed. Then he put up the serpent. He was about to lift his hammer to strike the monster when Ymir cut Thor's line so that the creature sank back into the sea. Thor threw his hammer in after it, and some say that the serpent's head was struck off, but most people say that it lived on and still encircles the world. I wonder why Thor wanted to kill the snake so much. Is it like a man thing? Killing big beasts like a monster hunter? What did the snake do to deserve this? And how did people know it was still alive? Our next move is about Freya, who wants a very nice necklace and is willing to pay anything for it. The lure of the necklace. As soon as she saw it, Freya knew she had to have the necklace of the Brisings. The chain was made by 4 dwarfs renowned for their prowess in working with gold, and they were not prepared to part with it lightly. One day, Freya chanced upon the home of 4 dwarfs who were engaged in working gold, their usual occupation. She saw that they were fashioning an exquisite necklace, the like of which she had never seen before. As she looked at the beautiful chain, she coveted it. She was certain that no neck other than hers should be adorned by such a jewel. She offered to buy the necklace from the dwarfs, but they replied that it was not for sale. Freya offered them everything she had of value, but the dwarfs were immovable. The more stubborn the dwarfs became, the more Freya wanted the necklace. She was soon consumed by her desire to own it. Eventually, the dwarfs named their price. "We all have we want. There is no object you can offer us, Freya. The only thing we truly desire is you. If you will spend 1 night with each of us, then we promise to give you the necklace." Taking aback, Freya reflected on the dwarf's proposal. Her desire for the necklace was insupportable, and for a goddess whose sexual appetite was the talk of Asgard, 4 illicit nights did not seem a high price to pay. Besides, thought Freya, no one would know, right? So she agreed to the dwarf's terms. Freya was as true to her promise as the dwarfs were to theirs. The necklace was to become her most prized possession. Ah, that's such a spicy myth. Obviously, we can't have a reading session without some kumas in it. Would you have done it? Would you sell your body for a necklace? Is that how much her body is worth? And I do wonder if the dwarfs didn't boast it with spending a night with her. Our next story is about Loki, who did some mischievous things, but gained big treasures for the gods in exchange for that. All the gods gained treasures. Dwarves were the craftsmen of Germanic mythology. Although they jealously guarded their skill and their gold, the artful Loki persuaded them to make 6 treasures, which he then gave to the gods, to the especially benefit of Thor. Ever the mischief maker, Loki decided to cut off all of the goddess Sif's golden hair as she slept. When Thor heard of Loki's prank, he threatened to break every bone in his body. So in terror, Loki promised that he would convince the dwarfs to fashion a new head of hair from gold. The dwarfs agreed to help him, out of trouble and please the gods. They not only made the head of hair for Sif, but also crafted the ship Skiblandnir, which when its sail was raised, would always get a fair wind and could be fitted in a pocket when it was not being used. As if this was not enough, they also forged the invincible spear Gungnir. But Loki could not resist further scheming. He made a bet with 2 dwarf brothers that they could not make treasures as precious as the first 3. They duly produced 3 more, despite the efforts of Loki, who, as a fly, tried to distract them. Loki took all the treasures to Asgard. He gave the hair to Sif, and it took root on her head. Then he gave Skibladnir to Frey and Gugnir to Odin, and both were greatly pleased. Next, he handed over the last 3 treasures. The first was the gold ring Draupnir for Odin. It said that 8 rings of equal weight and value dripped from it every 9th night. Second, for Frey, was a golden boar, which ran across the sky and sea faster than any horse and shed light from its bristles. The third was the magical hammer Mjolnir, which he gave to Thor. The gods thus owe their greatest treasures to Loki, although, in deciding that Mjolnir was the best gift, the gods stated that the dwarves had won the wager with Loki, which he reneged on. Loki doesn't even seem like such a bad boy in these stories. Sure, maybe a little bit annoying cutting off the hair from Sif as a prank, but not evil like he was portrayed in the introduction text. He seems like he only needs a big sisterly hug. Our next story is about Loki again, another prank of his. The Golden Apples. Ever the menace, Loki allowed his actions to threaten the gods with extinction, but it was also his resourcefulness that eventually saved them. Loki was taken captive by a giant called Thiazi, who would not free him unless he promised to deliver to him the goddess Idun and her precious apples of eternal youth, which she carried with her at all times. Always thinking of himself, Loki vowed to do this, so the giant released him. Loki contrived to lure Idun into a forest beyond the safe confines of Asgard, where Thiazi swooped down on her in the shape of an eagle, snatched her up, and took her to his home. The gods were immediately affected by the loss of the youth-giving fruit, and the trees grew old and grey. Fearing for their lives, they met together to decide what to do. They discovered that Idun had last been sighted with Loki, so they seized him and threatened him with death if he did not recover her and her apples. Loki promised to find her, and borrowed Freya's falcon shape to fly to Thiazi's castle in Giantland. Luckily, he found Idun there all alone, and quickly transformed her into a nut so that he could fly home to Asgard, where her grasped in his claws. When Thiazi returned and discovered his captive had escaped, he adopted the eagle shape again and gave chase. The Aesir saw the falcon flying with a nut gripped in its claws, and the eagle following closely behind. They acted quickly and built a fire in Asgard. The falcon flew over the wall and immediately dropped down to safety. But the eagle was not able to take evasive action straight away and flew directly into the flames, where it perished. Here you can also see again that Loki did something stupid, but he fixed it afterward. So I think that's a lot more than other gods and humans do most of the time. That is also, I guess, a nice little lesson for us. If we get found out that we made a mistake, we should fix it and not run away. What I find interesting though is that these gods are also not immortal, right? They need these golden apples, best fruit, to stay youthful and not to die. So I think that's actually quite interesting. That's also a little lesson for you, my little pip, to always eat an apple every day to stay as youthful, as young as I do. Our next story is about a big, strong wolf. Finding the wolf Fenrir. The gods were afraid that the huge wolf Fenrir, born of an illicit coupling between Loki and the giantess Angbroda, caused them serious harm, so they attempted to restrain it. But they could not have done so without the selfless bravery of Tyr, god of war. When the gods saw how huge Fenrir was growing, they were alarmed and decided to bind the creature. They found a strong iron fetter, outlading, and suggested that the wolf pit a strength against it. Fenrir did not think much of the shackle, so he let them bind him and freed himself easily. The gods forged another fetter, twice as strong, called Drumi, and urged the wolf to try again. They said that Fenrir would become very famous if he could shake off this binding. Fenrir felt even stronger now, broke from Drumi with ease. Aesir now feared that they would not be able to restrain Fenrir. Odin then sent word to the dwarfs that they should make another fetter, Gleipnir. It was smooth, soft, and silky as a ribbon, but deceptively strong. The Aesir were very pleased. Fenrir looked at it carefully and said, "I do not think I will gain much of a reputation by breaking such a thin ribbon. And if this band is made by magical art, then, thin as it is not going around my legs." Fenrir thought again and said, "If I cannot free myself, I will have to wait a very, very long time while you free me. But lest you think I'm a coward, I will take part in this game if one of you will dare to put his hand in my mouth." None of the gods dared take the risk until at last Tyr volunteered to put his right hand into Fenrir's mouth. At that, the wolf allowed itself to be bound, but discovered that the harder he kicked, the stronger the fetter became. The Aesir all laughed, except Tyr, who lost his hand to Fenrir's jaws. The Aesir just seemed like assholes, honestly. Fenrir did nothing wrong. It was just a big strong baby, and if they would have treated it nicely, I can imagine that Fenrir would have protected them. But nope, they bounded it by deceiving it, and that's so cheap and sad. Poor big doggo. Our next story is about an unhappy couple, and in my opinion, a sad late marriage. Njord and Skadi. The mountain goddess Skadi was the daughter of the giant Thiazi, whom the Aesir killed after he had stolen the golden apples of youth. She arrived at Asgard, determined to avenge her father. The Aesir, hoping to placate her, offered her pick of the unmarried gods. In full armor, Skadi must have made an impression upon the Aesir. Repenting the death of her father, they were eager to make amends by helping her find a husband. But the gods make nothing easy for the giants or their offspring. A parade was carefully arranged, in which only the gods' feet were visible. Skadi picked the pair that was by far the cleanest, whitest, and best kept. She was sure that they must belong to Balder, the fairest and most desirable of the gods. Then the owner of the feet was made to reveal his identity. Instead of Balder, Skadi had chosen Njord, god of the sea, whose feet were pristine because the sea continually washed over them. At first Skadi was taken aback, but she agreed to the marriage anyway. The partnership was a difficult one. Skadi, the daughter of a mountain giant, longed to live in her peak-top sanctuary, but Njord did not feel comfortable anywhere other than by the sea. They agreed to compromise by residing for 9 nights in Thrymheim, Skadi's mountain castle, followed by 9 nights at Nuatun, Njord's coastal abode. But this arrangement failed to satisfy either Skadi or Njord. Each was desperately unhappy in the other's home. Njord could not bear the dark, foreboding mountains surrounded by the eerie sound of howling wolves, and Skadi could not tolerate the vast expanse of sea, and complained about the screeching of the gods. Eventually, the two were forced to live apart. Njord stayed by the sea, while Skadi returned to the mountains, where she was often to be seen roaming the slopes. I really feel bad for both. They got tricked by the rest of the gods and had to live in an unhappy marriage. Would you rather live by the sea or in the mountains? I definitely would choose the sea, but you probably already know that. It really surprised me that Skadi forgot all about her grudge after she found a husband, especially one that she didn't really want to. So this whole arrangement kind of feels strange. In the past, we had a few myths already where a man fell in love with a woman, and instead of going to her by himself and confessing his love, they sent someone else to do it for them. And this myth is one of those. Frey falls in love. Gerd personified the cornfield. Not in the clutches of the giants, she was unable to flourish and needed the help of Frey, lord of fertility, to break her wintry internment. One day Frey sat in Odin's high seat, forbidden to others from where he could survey the universe. He went away full of woe, for he had seen a beautiful woman and had fallen hopelessly in love with her. The woman was Gerd, the daughter of two giants, who confined her in their mountain home in the north. It was said that when Gerd lifted her arms, all the worlds were lit up by her beauty. Frey withdrew into himself, and no one dared approach him. Eventually, his father Njord asked Frey's servant Skirnir, who represented the sun, to try to discover the source of Frey's sadness. Frey told Skirnir that he had fallen in love with Gerd. And if I do not have her as my wife, I fear I will not live long. You must ask her to marry me and bring her back here whether her father agrees or not. I shall reward you well for it. Skirnir asked for Frey's magnificent sword, which could fight on its own, and Frey handed it to him without hesitation. Skirnir traveled to Gerd's home, only to discover that she was reluctant to marry Frey. Initially, Skirnir offered her the golden apples of youth and Odin's gold ring, but she was not swayed. Skirnir then threatened violence, but still Gerd refused to marry Frey. Eventually, Skirnir warned that he would curse her with bewitchment and the gods' wrath. At this, Gerd yielded and promised to come to Asgard 9 nights thence. When Skirnir returned with the news, Frey thought he would never be able to survive that long without his beloved. He did, however, and Frey and Gerd finally married. Frey is such a drama queen, honestly. I really dislike how in a lot of these stories the man wants a woman, but instead of going to them himself, they send a servant, like in this one as well, or a relative. And when the woman doesn't want to marry a stranger, they always fall back to violence and threats. I hope Frey treated her right, and Gerd was happy in the marriage at least. Our next myth is a special one. We are going on the funeral this time. On a real funeral, not a wedding that becomes a funeral. The funeral of a god. Balder was the most beautiful and beloved of the Aesir. So when he died, the other gods gave him a magnificent funeral, a kind reserved for the elite of Norse society. The god was placed on his ship and was launched, engulfed in flames, into the sea. Beings of many kinds attended Balder's cremation, including Odin with his ravens, Rig with all the Valkyries, Freya with her cats, and Frey in his chariot drawn by the golden boar Gulimborsti. The Aesir had to summon a giantess named Hirukin to launch Balder's immense ship. She pushed the boat out with just a notch, while flames flew from the rollers and the earth quaked. Thor was so angry at being unable to accomplish the task himself that he raised his hammer to smash the giantess' skull, but the other gods intervened on her behalf, and eventually placated him. As Balder's body was carried to the ship, his wife Nanna collapsed and died from grief, and was laid next to him on the pyre. Then the Aesir set the ship alight, and Thor consecrated it with his hammer, Mjolnir. At the same time, an unfortunate dwarf named Lit happened to run in front of Thor's foot. The god kicked him onto the burning ship, where he perished. Ah, I want to see this. I really would have liked to have been there, to be honest. I would really like to have been there. These funerals, they're always such a big celebration. Or well, not celebration, that's the wrong word. But they're like written in a very fantastic way, kinda. And I just have to imagine it. I also find it kinda funny how Thor wants to kill the female titan that is stronger than him. That's also one way to become the strongest, by just killing your competition with your overpowered weapons. Our next move explains the separation of New Zealand and Sweden. The ploughing of Gefjon. The origin of the island of Zealand, upon which Copenhagen now stands, is explained in the myth about the goddess Gefjon. It is thought that she was responsible for separating the territory from Sweden, by tricking the Swedish king with her cunning and magic. The goddess Gefjon was a minor figure among the Aesir, remembered in medieval times mainly as a patron of chastity. Yet her best-known exploit suggests that in an earlier era she had a very different reputation. For a Viking Age poem by a Swedish royal bard describes how Odin sent her traveling around the human realm of Midgard, where she chanced upon the court of King Gylfi of Sweden. There her beauty won the ruler's favor, and she willingly encouraged his advances. Having taken his pleasure with her, he rewarded her with a grant of land in his kingdom. Knowing nothing of her divine origins, he promised her as much territory as she could plough with 4 oxen in the day and the night. Gefjon seized the opportunity with both hands. Setting off for Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, she used her divine powers to transform 4 sons born to a giant into cattle. These were the beasts with which she chose to take up Gylfi's offer. The 4 ploughed mightily, bearing down so hard on the earth that they detached the soil from its moorings. Then they took to the water to pull it far out into the Baltic Sea. Moving south around Sweden's tip, they finally deposited it offshore as an island, to which Gefjon gave the name of Zealand. A huge lake, now called Lake Malar, remained in Sweden, where the land had been uprooted. Observers have remarked that its inlets closely match the peninsulas on Zealand. I find it so fascinating how people back then made up reasons and theories, kinda how environment formed itself. We also had those in Greece, right? The whirlpool, for example, and the cliffs, I think, right? What was it called? Between Sicily and something else, right? I'm not sure actually right now. But I find it very, very cool that people back then, tried to find the reason for these natural occurrences. Do you think King Gylfi deserves being tricked like this? At first I felt kinda bad for him because he got tricked, but after rereading the story, he also didn't expect her to get that much land, right? He actually set her up for failure, but she was just, too good. She was just too good, too strong, too divine, for his trickery. She outsmarted him. This was our last tale of Norse mythology, and we're now going to Germanic tales. Walter and Hagen. In contrast with the gods and goddesses of Viking myth, most early Germanic tales that survive involve human heroes. For these courageous mortals, death was no tragedy. Far more distressing was the dilemma when the man found himself trapped between conflicting loyalties. When Etzel, the 5th century leader of the Huns, made successful incursions into Germanic territory, he was said to have demanded 3 hostages as a price for ceasing hostilities: Walter of Aquitaine, Hagen the Frank, and Hildegund, who was to be married to Walter. Walter and Hagen were forced to fight in Etzel's army, where they swore friendship to each other, and Hildegund was put in charge of Etzel's treasure. However, all 3 escaped, taking Etzel's gold with them. They reached the Rhine in Hagen's homeland, and news of their coming was brought to Gunther, the Frankish king, who felt he had the right to take the gold from them by force, as Etzel had plundered his lands. Hagen, as Gunther's vassal, was bound by oath to assist him, and so left the other 2. Walter and Hildegund encamped in the pass among rocks, and there Walter prepared to fight. Gunther sent 12 Frankish warriors against Walter, and one by one they were slain, including a young nephew of Hagen. Tragically, torn between honoring 2 sacred bonds, Hagen himself would not fight his friend, though Gunther taunted him with cowardice. He and the king withdrew. At dawn, Walter and Hildegund left their cave, only to be ambushed in open country by Gunther and Hagen. This time, Hagen joined in the attack to avenge his nephew. Fierce was the fight of 2 against 1, ceasing only when all 3 were maimed. Then, at last, the warriors made peace, and Hildegund bound up their wounds. When I first read this story, I found it quite confusing with all these words. So I'm not sure if you were able to follow, but probably because you're smart. But I will still explain it again. So there were 3 friends. These 3 friends, 2 men and 1 woman, they got held as hostages for an enemy that plundered the lands or something of a king. And these 3 friends, they managed to escape from the enemy, and they went back to their homeland of the king that got plundered. While they escaped, they also took the gold with them that the enemy took from the king. So the king wanted to retake the gold because it was his in the end. One of the friends was a knight or vassal or the king. So he had to fight his other friends to get back the gold, and his nephew also got killed while they were fighting. But apparently in the end they all make peace and make up again. But what about the king that still wants to have his treasure? While, yeah, it's kind of a dick move, I guess, of the king to just demand the gold back that got plundered and received from the 3 friends. I kinda understand him though. But they could at least have made a deal and no one had to die in the end. And it's kinda a strange story why they didn't just give part back of the gold to the king and just made up the deal and just became enemies of each other. Kind of strange, but that's humans for you, I guess. Our next move is a little bit confusing, so let's just get into it, okay? Grimhild's Revenge. In the German Nibelung legend, Gunther and Hagen killed Siegfried, then stole his gold and hid it in the Rhine. In this Norse version, Siegfried's widow and Gunther's sister Kriemhild was forced to marry Ece, the Hun, whose sole purpose was to discover Sigurd's gold. So I think Siegfried is the other one, the other friend of the trio. And instead of making up with each other, like in the last one, they actually, the king and his knight, they killed the other one to retrieve the gold. But Ece, the enemy from the other country, still wants the gold as well, and well, take it back again from the thieves or whatever. And yeah, that's what the story is about. It's a little bit confusing. Ece invited Gunther and Hagen to a banquet, but Kriemhild suspected treachery. Sent them a ring carved with runes to warn them to keep away. Yet Gunther replied defiantly, "Bring us ale in golden goblets, for this may be our final drink." They traveled to Ece's fortress, where armed men overwhelmed and captured them. They were imprisoned apart, and Gunther was asked if he would buy his life with his treasure. "First bring me Hagen's heart," he said. So Ece's men cut out Hagen's heart and brought it to Gunther, who cried out, "Now you will never find Sigurd's heart, Ece. Only I know where it lies. Let the Rhine keep it, rather than Hans enjoy it." "Take him to the snake pit," ordered Ece. He watched while Gunther sat chained among the poisonous creatures, playing his harp until he died. When Ece returned, Kriemhild greeted him warmly, telling him, "I have had 2 young deer slaughtered to feast you." But when Ece was half drunk, she jeered at him. "The meat you have eaten shared with your men was the hearts of your 2 sons. You will never see them playing again." That night Kriemhild drove a sword through Ece as he slept in a stupor, and burned the hall down, killing all who had helped cause her brother's death. No woman since has done such fearsome deeds to avenge her kin. It's such a strange story. Let's just go on to the next one. Our next move is about a rite of passage. At least I think that's how it's called. How Alboin obtained a sword. Mere prowess in battle was not enough proof of valor for the Langobard tribe. The Langobard king Alboin, who was to settle his people by conquest in northern Italy, had to prove himself in his youth by an act of courage that bordered on effrontery. In his youth, Alboin had fought successfully in his people's war against the Gepids and had killed their prince, Turismud. Returning home, the warriors asked that Alboin should sit in honor at the table of his father, King Audoin, during the victory feast. But Audoin refused him this privilege, saying it was a Langobard custom not to let the prince eat at his father's table, until he had managed to obtain a sword from a foreign king. Hearing this, Alboin at once rode off with 40 companions to the stronghold of Turescent, king of the Gepids, where he claimed hospitality as a peaceful guest. Turescent could not, in honor, refuse. He welcomed the Langobards to his banqueting hall and seated Alboin at his side, where his dead son Turismud used to sit, although he knew well that it was by Alboin's hand that Turismud had met his death. Others among his entourage were less patient. One of the king's younger sons mocked the Langobards because they wore white leggings. "You look like white-legged mares. Have many men ridden you?" To this, one of the Langobards retorted, "You there, whose prince's bones lie scattered on the meadow like those of a wretched old pack horse, go back to the battlefield and learn how hard these mares can kick." Both sides reached for their weapons, but King Turiscent put himself between them and ordered his men to keep the peace, saying it would be an offense to God to attack guests in one's own hall. After the feast, he took his dead son's sword and presented it to Alboin. Then Alboin triumphantly returned home and was granted a seat at his father's table. When he told what had happened, the Langobards marveled at Alboin's boldness and at Turisen's great wisdom and magnanimity. That father of the prince that didn't got killed, that was the killer, such a douche, I don't know, like, maybe tell your son beforehand that he needs to retrieve a sword from an enemy, and not after he already this is also such a strange story again, with so many questions. Like, why did the king not tell his son right away that to prove himself he has to show him a sword of a defeated enemy? I mean, the prince could have already gotten the sword of the one he killed, right? And just took it home with him right away if he knew about this. But instead he had to return and ask for hospitality, etc. Like, they could have just skipped out on all of this if he just knew before. It's so strange, these tales. And our next story, the snake pit returns. Laughing in the face of death. One of the most celebrated heroes' deaths was that of the Viking champion Ragnar Lodbrok, who, like Gunther, had his fearlessness put to the supreme test by being left in a pit filled with deadly snakes. A familiar figure in Northern epics, Ragnar Lodbrok is thought to have been modeled on a real-life raider of the 9th century. In the tales, he was a fearless warrior who mounted the Danish throne at the age of 15 and married the lowly ward of a peasant couple, only to find out later that her true parents were the Germanic heroes Siegfried and Brunhild. He rescued another of his 4 wives from a castle, entirely entwined in the coils of a huge dragon. The name Lodbrok, or leather breeches, comes from the oxhide armor he is said to have worn for that exploit. He is probably best known, though, for the manner of his death, which occurred after a raid on England. Captured by King Ella of Northumbria, he was condemned to die in a pit of adders. At first, he was shielded by a magic shirt given to him by his mother, but when this was removed, he had no protection from the snake's venom. Accepting his fate with equanimity, he bellowed forth a death song proclaiming that he went to his end laughing. Even so, Ragnar was to be ferociously avenged. His sons later captured King Ella and disemboweled him by opening up his back and internal organs to form the image of a spread eagle. What happened to King Ella in the end is called the blood eagle and was a Viking torture measurement where the rib cage gets opened up in the back, I think, and spread out, and then the lungs get spread out over the bone cage that is looking out. And that was a very, very gruesome death. I saw that in a movie. It was called Midsummer. It's about a Swedish cult. It's actually a very interesting, nice movie. I can really recommend that one. It's a psychotic horror movie. And they also used that on one of the guys there. But I couldn't look at it. It was too disgusting to look at. I actually had to close my eyes. Anyways, I read though that there is no evidence that the Vikings actually did this. But it was definitely possible even back then to just open up the ribcage like that. Our today's reading session will end with a typical hero story. The triumph of Wolf Dietrich. The Germanic tale of Wolf Dietrich is a classic hero legend involving childhood rejection, dragon slaying, a period of exile, and a triumphal return. The legendary Wolf Dietrich may be based on Theodoric the Great, a real ruler who seized power in Italy in the 6th century CE. Wolf Dietrich was the son of Dietrich, Emperor of Constantinople, and the beautiful Hildeburg. But their marriage was a secret one, for Hildeburg's father Walgund would permit no suitors, and the child was born while Dietrich was away at the wars. One time, when Hildeburg had to hide the baby to prevent her parents from discovering him, he disappeared, only to be found days later in the forest nearby playing with wolf cubs. From that incident, he won his name. In time, Walgund did learn of the marriage and accepted it. Wolf Dietrich grew up to be a fine man, in every way a suitable heir to the throne. But in Constantinople, a faction refused to accept him, spreading the rumor that he was not Dietrich's child. When the old emperor died, this group drove Wolf Dietrich from the city, setting his 2 younger brothers on the throne in his stead. From then on, Wolf Dietrich's life was devoted to regaining his rightful inheritance. He had to suffer many trials on the way. At one point, he fell into the hands of a hideous witch, Else, who took the form of a she-bear. When he consented unwillingly to marry her, she turned into a beautiful princess, with whom he lived happily for many years. Then he sought to enlist the aid of Ordnet, king of the Lombards, in his cause, only to find that his intended ally had been killed by a dragon. Wolf Dietrich confronted the beast, and succeeding in killing it with the aid of a magic shard of invulnerability and a sword that had been tempered in dragon's blood. Eventually, he returned to Constantinople and triumphed over his enemies. Then he returned to Lombardy to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. I want to hear more details about this one. I want to read about all the trials of Wolf Dietrich. I wonder if there is a full book about him that has written down all of his tales, like Hercules' trials from Greece. So I would be really interested in that one. What was your favorite myth of tonight though? Is there something that especially interests you or you want to delve deeper into? Write me what you think. And if you enjoyed today's reading, I would be very happy if you like the video and subscribe. That would be really cool. Next week we are going to read about the Middle Ages. Wowee! I'm really excited for this one. I'm really interested, or at some point I was really interested in Middle Ages torture devices. Very interesting times. I'm glad I'm not living in those though, otherwise I would have probably been burned on the stakes. But yeah, I hope you have a wonderful night. Sleep well, my little pip, and I hope to see you next time again. Goodbye.